Avengers Assemble. Not the show, the saying. So, this is what I would do with the Avengers series. Okay, the first season is essentially some assembly required. You get to be introduced to a series of different Marvel characters and villains, most of which are villains, and are starting to pop up and no one knows what to do with them. So, when S.H.I.E.L.D. essentially creates the series of prison complexes in order to contain them, it unfortunately gets harder. Yes, this idea is based on Earth's Mightiest Heroes. I do admit I love the series. So I want to at least create some homage to it with the first episode, which will have Graviton as the main villain, who is essentially a villain that can alter the very gravitational waves that we perceive it. You can fly, you can get crushed on the ground, stuff like that. Oh, there was actually a comic issue where he tried crushing the entire Avengers with the Statue of Liberty, with Hulk having to lift it up so horribly, and honestly, that should give you an image on just how powerful this is. My first Avengers team, it would have Iron Man, Thor, Ant-Man, Hank Pym, the Wasp, Hulk temporarily, but then he leaves right around near the beginning because I have my own things I want to do with him in the series, and then he's instantly replaced with Captain America midway. So, here is how it all goes. I'll give you their regular character arcs, their backstories, their motivations, and I'll show you exactly what I have planned for them, and you guys can do whatever you want with it. So, Iron Man. Let's start with the obvious one. Anthony Edward Stark, also known as Tony Stark, we've all seen the movie. He built a lot of weapons. He essentially was kidnapped and was forced to make weapons for terrorists. And then he made the Iron Man suit in order to break out. Here's the difference though. Just like in the comics during some of the earlier issues, Tony cannot get out of the armor because it's linked to his arc reactor that's in his chest due to the terrorists' attacks. And thus, he kind of walks around in this giant metal suit for a little while. And then he comes back by the time of the Earth's Mightiest Heroes series starts, and actually creates the Iron Man persona. He essentially links it to that of being his bodyguard, which conveniently was the original plan for them in the movie. But then Robert Downey Jr. disagreed and created the infamous I am Iron Man scene, and then, yeah. Iron Man now is having to deal with his own rogues gallery as he's busy off fighting off Justin Hammer, who is essentially trying to usurp Stark Enterprises. Yes, this is a very, very non-editorial video. I don't really have any editing skills, nor do I really know any editors. I'll be impressed when one finds me. But essentially, Hammer himself is now giving these tech villains of Iron Man, Blizzard, a guy whose suit can create, blizzards, the living laser. The name should actually give away what his suit allows him to do. There is also the Melter, who just has a melting ray. I know, not really that impressive. There's also Whiplash, you've seen the second movie. Though, weirdly enough, they actually used the Crimson Dynamo, a Russian, more militarized version of Iron Man's technological suit, and is essentially what they were going to do with him. Then they made Whiplash him instead, but they still kept the name. So I actually want to make them two separate characters. None of them have to be similar, but they are essentially more, but you essentially get what I mean. Okay. Justin Hammer eventually creates his own version of the Iron Man suit, known as Titanium Man, in order to beat Iron Man in his own game. And then, if you've actually seen Kamen Rider Agito's movie, you know where this is gonna go. Essentially, the suit kills Hammer inside of him, and then just pilots his body's corpse around it, like, for a while, because it was actually, interestingly, had Mr. Fix-It, who was basically blackmailed by the scientific terrorist organization known as the Advanced Idea Mechanics, also known as AIM, which will get more of an expansion by Season 2. Essentially, but basically, they're egomaniacs who believe their intellect is superior to all of humanity's, and they'll basically rule over the world with it. That's about it. So, yeah. That's what I wanted to do with that. Thor! This is not the normal Thor. Because this is actually Dr. Donald Blake. Now, for those that are unaware, and most people are, Donald Blake is a doctor. A surgeon, specifically. Sort of like Doctor Strange, but not really. He essentially goes around and just... I don't know where I'm going with that. Essentially, he gets his leg injured during a villain attack. Essentially. I don't know if I want to make it like the comics, where it's like an alien that looked like the Thing for the Fantastic Four, or if I want to make it a different kind of villain. But essentially, during that time, he gets his leg injured and discovers Mjolnir hiding within the rock. He takes up the hammer, becomes worthy, and becomes that version of Thor. Yes, I know, it is very different from what you're essentially used to. But because I just want to do something different, and this was the original intention. Thor now has to deal with the fact that working with his with his own medical practices and his life as the god of thunder. Since by taking up the hammer, he has now been hounded by more villains related to Asgardian myths. At first, it's simple. There's the Wrecking Crew, who basically all wield essential metals based on the same mineral that made up Thor's hammer. The Wrecker with a crowbar, Thunderball with a wrecking ball. There's Pile Driver with his own ginormous fist, and I don't know what you call it, brass knuckles. Yeah. And then Bulldozer, which just picture the Juggernaut but with a tinier head and an orange jumpsuit. You got him. It's simple shit like that. Then it gets weirder. The main antagonist for Thor's major arc is the infamous Enchantress. She's essentially an Asgardian sorceress. She got kicked out of the Asgard way back when and assumes Thor is the real Thor, because she's in love with him. While that, her personal bodyguard, Scourge the Executioner, is also in love with her, like in the comics. So then Scourge goes ahead and tries to dig down Thor. He gets his ass kicked, and then Enchantress essentially tries and does everything in her power to make Thor's life a living hell, even enchanting the Hulk into trying to kill him, which then causes the Hulk to leave. It eventually ends with Scourge actually getting a reality check when Enchantress is approached by Surtur from the land of Muspelheim, who wants to create the events of Ragnarok. And Enchantress is now basically brainwashed into working with him. Also, he kind of has like, she's now from this beautiful blonde green magical form to this ugly red goblin-like shape, which I don't really want to talk about anymore. Just showing a descent into madness. And then Scourge and Thor team up to kick Surtur in the Enchantress's ass. So by now you're probably wondering, what the hell does any of that matter? Well, by the end of the arc, Scourge and Thor decide to go throughout the 9 realms in order to actually take down more of their magical antagonists from Thor. That way I can give more opportunities for us to get to know them. Which, yeah, that's would be his half of his arc during season 2. Okay, I need a break. the Hulk's arc is sort of different from the rest. Like I said, he breaks off from the Avengers very early on. Doesn't really do a whole lot, just more or less living in Avengers Mansion. But yes, Dr. Bruce David Banner essentially finds the kid Rick Jones basically near a nuclear launch site. He gets hit by the experimental gamma bomb that sort of mutates him and creating the Hulk personality. That is essentially it. That's his whole backstory. Banner thinks the Hulk is a monster that will eventually cause the destruction of everyone else, while the Hulk just really wants to be left alone, but hounded by General Ross to essentially arrest him for the eventual problems that would arise. Now, just to clarify, Ross doesn't actually hate Banner. He just understands that the Hulk is a problem and just wants to get him removed. So, what does he do? He goes after the Hulk. That's about it. What I had in mind for all of this was the link up with Hulk's whole side characters and other villains. Yes, we would have our Emil Blonsky's military man that wants revenge on the Hulk, so becomes the Abomination. But we also have Crusher Creel, a guy who essentially gets magic, and now any metal he essentially touches, he can absorb and mimic their physical property. He's onto his skin. There is also the UFOs, basically made of 4 people who want to replicate the Fantastic Four Space Adventure, but replace it with Gamma. This then creates Ironclad, the Thing, but instead of rocks, it's steel. Vector, Mr. Fantastic, but if instead of elastization, it's matter repulsion. Invisible Woman, or Invisible Girl, depending on which version you want, who essentially, instead of going invisible and create force shields, she can actually turn herself into poisonous gas. And X-Ray, the Human Torch, but instead now he's a living, literal X-ray machine of a human body that can shoot X-ray emissions that can reverse the Hulk's genome powers. There is also the introduction of the Bi-Beast, essentially an alien robot created from some bird alien people. I don't really know much about that other than that, but he has like but he looks like a giant brown version of the Hulk. But he has like 2 faces on his forehead and on where his actual face is. Weirdly enough, they're both hyper intelligent. The one up here actually focuses more on Shakespearean literature and similar works, while the one down here focuses on battle tactics and war history, which I gotta admit is really nice. If it wasn't for his appearance, he probably would have been way more remarkable. But the main villains of all of this, well, the 2 main villains, there's actually 2. General Talbot, and then there's the leader. Talbot is someone that even Nick Fury would be shitting his pants, which if you know him from the MCU, at least during his early appearances, as his badass, all powerful military guy persona, yeah, that Nick Fury will be shitting his pants compared to all the shit Talbot has done. Or am I thinking of someone else? I'm essentially combining Talbot with another character. Essentially, Talbot is just jealous of the Hulk because Banner was kind of in love with his high school crush at the time. And he's a bit of a stalker in the original comics, but I'm combining him with a different character I can't remember the name of what I'm thinking. And he has his own personal Hulk soldier named, not Flux, but yeah, Flux, who is essentially very, very much into unresolved mother issues. And as a result, Talbot manipulates Flux using his mother's voice to basically make him attack the Hulk. The other one is the leader, who was actually the main antagonist of Captain America: Brave New World. Samuel Stearns, but unlike, is essentially in the comics, and like in this series, just some random guy. He just got close to a gamma radiation and basically made his brain one of the most intelligent things of the planet. So now he decides to create a Gamma world just for him and other mutants like him. But he has honestly more connections to his own minions. Half-Life, which I use as a character in one of my sketches, is essentially a Gamma-powered vampire-like person that absorbs energy, but can only stay alive for 12 hours a day, and then dies and then comes back for another 12 hours and such. He is one of the leader's regular minions. The other one is Madman. Madman is essentially the leader's brother. He was in college with the Hulk, Banner during the school year, during their college years, and essentially grew jealous and wanted to replicate Banner's new gamma radiation, which unfortunately created the Madman but made him a mindless dullard. Gotta love the switch up. And if I had to include any other characters in this, I would have definitely included Ravage, who was like one of the Banner's old college professors, was unfortunately slowly dying, and when he discovered that Banner wanted to cure himself of the Hulk's self, he essentially decided, you wanna know what? I'm gonna copy his powers so that way I can use his advanced regeneration abilities, which he does have, and then to heal him himself. But then created a more sadistic but still somewhat younger version of the Hulk called Ravage. That's about it. That's all the Hulk has. Now, if you don't mind, eventually, near the end of all of this, the Hulk actually develops his own equivalent of an intelligence and then actually speaks fluent sentences, like in the comics. But then also creates a gray personality called Joe Fixit, who will actually be expanded upon by Season 2. Ant-Man and the Wasp. They're exactly what you're going to be thinking right now. They're not really the most remarkable in, villain-wise. There are two villains I do want to focus on for them. One is Egghead, who is essentially Hank Pym's arch-rival, and then there's the Black Knight, a guy who is essentially wearing this who essentially has his cursed sword and flies on this genetically created Pegasus in order to eventually rob people and just does a few mercenary works. The reason I include the Black Knight because he actually is one of the few honorable characters and does try to get a redemption arc, but unfortunately fails at it and then dies by the end. Yeah. But the characters is essentially where I'm going with this. You see, the Wasp is not into science as Hank. Jan just actually enjoys wanting to be a hero. She was just exposed to an uncontrolled molecule in one of Hank's experiments, now grows tiny, grows miniature wings, and wasping lasers. Pew, pew. Hank, on the other hand, is fully dedicated to his scientific research, studying more with his Pym particles, which allows him to shrink and grow whenever you want. You know, you've seen the movie. The problem with this is that Hank actually is a bit of a pacifist. He wants to rehabilitate these criminals and regularly tries to talk things over, which is actually very interesting comparing it to Simon Williams, also known as the Wonder Man, who does make an appearance. Essentially, for a brief backstory, Simon Williams, also known as the Wonder Man, essentially his whole company was bought up by Stark Enterprises. Then his brother, who is a notorious criminal, which I want to get back to on him later, essentially convinces Simon to rob Stark Enterprises. He gets caught, and then gets caught into a genetic reality-bending experiment, essentially. And you can very clearly tell where this is going. Essentially, he tries killing off Stark for basically ruining his enterprise, though Stark actually is trying to do better, and this is one, again, just taking it from the show itself. Hank does try to talk him down, and he gets really close, but then the molecular destabilization within Wonder Man just slowly destroys his external body, and then he dies. That's about it. And yeah, that's really all I want to do with them, and I want to expand more on Ant-Man later, because the reaction by the end of the season convinces him to create Ultron, like in the comics. So, as you can very clearly tell, I am just doing this by memory, and it's really hard. Really, wish I knew editors. Cut this down. The last one I introduce is obviously Captain America, like I said. Now, we all seen the movie. Captain America fights the Nazis, eventually falls into ice thanks to his super soldier serum. He's basically kept alive for hundreds of years. And you want to know the first thing? Yeah, he is just getting more used to the modern era, and that's what I like. Oh, yeah, and his main rivalry with Baron Zemo, a former Nazi supporter, but now discovers that the Nazis are forming a terrorist organization called Hydra. So, yeah, trying to take over the world. I want to expand more on Hydra later. But he's essentially fighting off both Zemo, who during the era of the World War II, he essentially just splashed him with a shit ton of essentially Strucker's own chemicals that rewrote his genetic DNA to make him immortal. And then Zemo actually plans on killing Captain America by assembling a villain group made up of the Melter, which I mentioned earlier, Wonder Man, which is the event of his death. Enchantress and Scourge get temporarily involved. And then finally comes Radioactive Man, who is essentially a Chinese guy who douses himself with permanent chemicals and other radioactivity, and is basically a Thor enemy who cannot feel the weight of Thor's hammer when it hits him in the head. That's how badass it is. Oh yeah, and the Black Knight. This is also when he dies. Wait, no. The Black Knight dies in an event afterwards. That's what I was aiming for. Yeah, that's essentially the whole point, and I want to expand more on Hydra and Captain America, because it'll essentially be like the movies. A little bit. But not without the time travel and other elements involved. And yeah, that's Season 1. Some assembly required. By the end of the season, Iron Man has decided to take a break from all the heroing. Ant-Man and Wasp also want to take a break because of what just happened. Captain America is left to form his own version of the Avengers. Hulk is now at war with Joe Fixit. And Thor's off-world. That's all of Season 1. That's all I need. And goodbye.